I am statements of Jesus. He has 7 of them in the book of John. And we have been looking at each one. And what does it mean? I am the bread of life. We are to see Jesus and our relationship with Jesus as the sustenance. Just like most of us would not forget to eat at least one meal a day, we shouldn't forget to nurture our spiritual life and meet with Christ and feast on his truth and that relationship. Last week we went through I am the light of Christ, and we noticed that when Jesus says he is the light of Christ, it's not just to light the way for us and so that we are not stumbling in the darkness and not knowing the right thing to do. We found that that light also illuminates some of the things that are in us that is wrong. It illuminates for us. We shouldn't be flashing it on other people. It is where God is illuminating in us the places that we are broken so that God can bring healing. It's kind of like my dad. My dad hates MRIs, but he's having to have them on a regular basis due to what's happened to his brain and the malformation that is in there. And he hates it. But if they don't do the MRI on him, it doesn't matter how many other people get MRIs, they're not going to find what is the problem and be able to move him towards healing. And so the light of Christ is to act that way in us, to show us where it is that we've allowed sickness of unforgiveness or selfishness or greed or fear to fester in us that is breaking us in our relationships. Today we're on to I am the gate. And I am the gate is probably the one that kind of doesn't sound as popular as the other I am statements. And as I've kind of studied this week, the way that it was always preached to me as a child, and as I was in the church all my life, it's also been a little bit different in the understanding when you look at the context. I've heard many people say, I am the gate. So you have to come through Christ to be part of the family of God. And when I looked at the analogy and as I read, I was like, this doesn't make much sense because it talks about a thief. And a thief coming over, the thief doesn't go to the gate, the thief goes over the wall. And a thief doesn't come into your house or my house and pretend to be one of our children or pretend to be one of our pets. They come to take something out and pull it out. And actually at the end of the scripture reading that we had today, talked about thieves come to destroy. And so they've come in, they break in to take and destroy and remove something of value to you. And that's what a thief going over the wall for the sheep, they're not trying to be a sheep. They're not trying to be part of the shepherd's flock. They're trying to steal from the flock. They're trying to take a sheep. So the analogy falls apart a little bit too soon. I think we have to go deeper for the meaning of I am the gate. The other thing about gates and the sheep pen we have is in Jesus' story, they would have been very familiar about the sheep pens and the shepherds. It was a common and still is a common occupation in the Holy Land. And so they would have known this illustration, even though they required Jesus to somewhat explain it. In the days of Jesus, the sheep pen would not just hold one family flock of sheep. It would be multiple families would be using the sheep pen. And so they would have a low gate so that people didn't go into the pen. They would have a lower gate, and the sheep would come in. And it would be multiple families, sheep would come in. And they didn't have like little pens. Yours go into pen number 1, yours goes into pen number 2, theirs go. It didn't have that system. It was just this big open space. And the sheep would mingle and gather. And we know that they didn't live there. They had to go out to the field. So being part of this sheep pen wasn't a symbol of salvation. This is where the protection was overnight. And so the sheep would come in, and there would be, overnight, all of them mingling. And then in the morning, there would be guards around the sheep pen. The shepherds would come, and the guards would know who the shepherds were. But even more important, when the shepherd came to the gate, they would do a special call. And that special call would call certain sheep. And you'd watch all of the different sheep come out from all over the pen and follow that shepherd. The sheep that were not part of that flock would remain where they were. They wouldn't listen to the call of that shepherd. But when the next shepherd came and said their call, if that was their call, they'd go out and follow after that shepherd. And so the sheep knew the shepherd's call and would only follow the shepherd that had the right call. I have a picture on the next slide that has a picture of a sheep pen. Even out into the wilderness, when they had to take the sheep out into the wilderness to do the grazing, because the grazing was better maybe south or north of them, they'd only be in places while the sheep would be able to feed. They might have to go a day or two away from their homeland, home city, and they'd be out in the wilderness, and they'd have these sheep pens. And in these sheep pens, they would let their sheep go in, and a shepherd would become the gate. The doorway was only big enough for a couple sheep to go through, and the shepherd would lay in between the sheep and danger. The shepherd would not let the sheep cut out. They'd have to go over the shepherd, and any danger would have to go through the shepherd. And so this is how Jesus could be the gate, the one who sits in the doorway in between danger and the safety of the pen. When we look at the scriptures that we have been following through John, we need to remember, first of all, that our gospel writers are not writing things chronologically. And John really moves things around in his gospel. Theologians love to argue whether the turning over the tables happened where John places it or where Matthew, Mark, and Luke place it. The Gospels writers are free to kind of move it around because they're trying to get the character and the person of Jesus communicated to us, not the timeline. It's kind of like when I do funerals. I sit with the family and I sit and talk about what was important about this person. What is the character of this person? What did you love? What are you going to miss? And then I take the stories and I place them in there. I don't care about the timeline. I just want to illustrate that this person was a person of faith and generosity. Why? Because their children watched them as they bought groceries and would drop them off at people's houses and not ring the doorbell, just leave them behind. This is how they knew what was important to this person. It was through the stories that they created. That's what John is doing here. He's giving us stories that are not necessarily in chronological order, but he wants us to order them in this way so that we get the flow of who Christ is. And we also have to remember that the early church would not do what we did. They didn't have verses and chapters. They would sit and read from the very beginning of John to the very end of John, all in one sitting. I'd break it all apart. And what happens is, well, we don't remember what happened in John chapter 8, John chapter 9, but those are all very important because it's leading up to this story. In John chapter 8, this is where we get the I am the light statement. But right before Jesus says, I am the light of the world, we get the story of the woman caught in adultery. And she is brought before Jesus by the religious leaders of the day. And they say, according to Moses, we have to stone her. And Jesus says, let those who have no sin cast the first stone. Then Jesus goes into the I am the light, and he tells them, you're judging improperly each other. Whereas I can see deeper than you can see. I am the light who shines and can see the hearts of men and reveal the hearts of men. We're invited not to judge each other. But the problem is the religious leaders, these people are supposed to be the shepherds. They're supposed to be like shepherds caring for God's people. And what they're going to do to this one who has gone astray is they say, we're going to stone her. get the story in Luke about the lost sheep, Jesus leaves the 99 and goes after the one that has wandered away. Then we get at the chapter 9, we get that story of the blind man who has been blind since birth. The disciples ask, is he to blame for his blindness, or did somebody else sin that caused this? And Jesus says, neither. You're still judging incorrectly. Jesus heals that blind man. And then what ends up happening in chapter 9 is this story goes on. The Pharisees and the religious leaders look and they see this blind man, well, this man that used to be blind, and they're like, hey, who did this? And they're trying to interrogate him and say, listen, you need to tell us and you need to give us evidence against Jesus. And the blind man won't do it. And so what the religious leaders do, the shepherds do, is we disagree with you, get out. And they pretty much excommunicate him from the community of faith. So this man who was living on the margins of life anyways, because he couldn't work when he was blind, he was a beggar because he was left out because of his disability. You then have him kicked out of the faith community, the support. He would be considered unclean because he wouldn't be able to go through the ritual cleansings and the ritual sacrifices. And so he's left out. The shepherds, once again, put a sheep in danger. Because if we think about it, as the shepherd is sitting here at the gate, if a sheep is left out, a predator comes by, a thief comes by, and that sheep is now in danger. And the call is to see Jesus is the good shepherd. He's the gate. He's the one gathering. So those that the church, those that the religious leaders want to kick out and push out and leave them on the margins, endanger them, the shepherd is gathering. So if you have felt like you've been left out, that you're not good enough, that people are judging you, the shepherd gathers you. Jesus is the one who says, you're mine. And it doesn't matter what anybody else says. I don't have the authority or the right and ability to judge who's in and out. I don't get to judge who God's going to use. I don't get to push people out. I'm called to follow after Christ, who gathers people in. Because it's inside the flock. It's inside with the shepherd that safety is found, that healing is found. Sheep that has been injured is not going to get better outside. It's inside. That our wounds are taken care of, that we are brought into right relationship with each other and with God. We don't have the right. What we are called to do is to pull everybody in, to include and call others to that loving relationship and be part of it. It doesn't mean they have to be where we are on every issue. And in fact, I can guarantee you, the person you're sitting next to or across from or somewhere in this space is different than you on some of their theology and some of their understanding at some point. But what we have in common is Jesus Christ, the one who gathers us in to protect us. He is the one that shines the light, and I trust where I am wrong, the light will shine. Where you are wrong, the light will shine, and God will bring healing, not because we exclude, but because together we go forward in healing, because we're in the presence of Christ when we are together. And so, Christ is the gate. If you are feeling left out, like you're not good enough, the Good Shepherd the gate, says, you are mine. Others might want to leave you out, but I bring you in. I am the one protecting you. And for us that have felt like we're part of the church and part of the flock, Christ says, offer that to others. That feeling that you have had, that feeling of safety, be that for others. And let my Spirit do the work. I am the gate. The robbers are trying to steal people away, sheep away, but I am the gate. I protect my flock. Let us be a people who trust in the care and salvation of our God, and also open our arms to others that need the healing, the safety of God's kingdom, that we might be and build God's kingdom for others.